All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're setting the stage for what is, arguably, one of the most complex, chaotic, and frankly, consequential 24 hours in all of human history. Operation Overlord, June 6, 1944. We're going to look closely at the minute-by-minute friction of war. We'll see how months of incredibly meticulous planning completely collided with unpredictable weather, terrified soldiers, and sheer blind luck.
To really wrap our heads around D-Day, we first have to drop ourselves directly into the terrifying reality of that morning. Picture this. It's the pitch-black hours right before dawn. The English Channel is just incredibly choppy, way worse than anyone predicted. You are crammed shoulder to shoulder with your brothers in arms in this tiny Higgins landing craft. The wind is howling, freezing water is spraying over the sides, and the sound of heavy breathing and men violently retching from intense seasickness just fills the air. You're clinging to your rifle like a life preserver, knowing for a fact that the second that ramp drops, you are walking directly into a mechanized slaughterhouse.
Section 1. The Atlantic Wall. Immovable defense. Now, the sheer scale of the buildup on both sides here, it is absolutely staggering. The Allies had essentially transformed Britain into this massive staging ground. We're talking 2 million troops, literally millions of tons of supplies, and 11,000 aircraft ready to provide air superiority. They are preparing to hurl this unstoppable force right at the continent, but waiting for them was Erwin Rommel's defense. Rommel, the architect of the German defense, knew he couldn't match the Allied numbers in the sky or on the sea. So he utilized forced laborers to turn the entire coast into an impenetrable fortress. Massive concrete bunkers, reinforced firing pits called Tobruk's, and crucially, over 4 million landmines scattered all along the beaches.
And the German defensive line relied on this really specific, lethal ingenuity. Take Rommel's asparagus, for example. Sounds kind of quirky, right? But it was a terrifyingly simple trap. Essentially, they were these fields of short wooden poles, all interlaced with webs of metal wire and sometimes even explosives, planted directly in the open fields of Normandy. Their sole purpose? To instantly shred any Allied gliders that attempted to land paratroopers behind enemy lines. It was a defense purposely designed to inflict maximum casualties in the very first seconds of combat.
Part 2. Deception and Delays. Airborne Drops. So the Allies desperately needed the French resistance to sabotage German supply lines before the invasion. But, they couldn't exactly just radio them the date. Instead, on June 1st, the BBC broadcasts this highly specific passage from a Paul Verlaine poem, The Long Sobs of the Violins of Autumn. Now, to a casual listener or some confused Nazi intelligence officer in Berlin, it was just a poetic broadcast. But to the French resistance, it was the exact prearranged signal that the invasion was imminent. Instantly, across France, resistance fighters emerged from hiding to blow up railways and destroy weapon caches, completely crippling the German ability to move reinforcements to the coast.
With the resistance activated, the whole operation goes into motion. But it immediately hits a massive roadblock, the weather. General Eisenhower actually had to delay the initial June 5th launch because of severe storms. When they finally got a slight break in the weather for June 6th, they went for it. At 2300 hours on the 5th, the paratroopers take off into the night sky. By 0300 hours, the massive invasion fleet halts in the channel to start loading the landing crafts. And by 0630, the ramps finally, terrifyingly, drop on the beaches.
But let me tell you, those initial nighttime paratrooper drops were an absolute unmitigated mess. Thick cloud cover and intense German anti-aircraft fire basically blinded the pilots. Because of this, the American 101st and 82nd, along with the British 6th Airborne, were just scattered all over the Normandy countryside, literally miles from their intended drop zones. Guys were landing in flooded fields, getting stuck in trees, some even landed right on top of German command posts. It was pure chaos. But incredibly, these scattered men managed to form makeshift, mixed units in the pitch dark and still succeeded in taking out key bridges and artillery batteries.
Section 3. 0 Hour. The Beaches.
As the morning unfolded, we saw stark, incredible contrasts across the 5 designated landing zones. British and Canadian forces pushed through some genuinely fierce resistance to secure Gold, Sword, and Juno beaches, successfully taking their objectives. Meanwhile, the Americans at Utah Beach actually drifted way off course due to heavy currents. But that mistake? It ended up being a stroke of pure luck. They landed in a much less defended sector, suffering only 197 casualties while successfully landing 21,000 men. However, that incredible luck was nowhere to be found at Omaha Beach. There, 34,000 troops landed, resulting in a devastating minimum of 2,400 casualties in a brutal, dragged-out fight. Part 4. Bloodbath at Omaha, a near disaster.
Because at Omaha, almost everything that could go wrong absolutely did go wrong. The preliminary naval and aerial bombardments, which were hindered by really low clouds, completely missed the German defenses. The bunkers were left entirely intact. And then there was the armor. These heavy amphibious duplex drive tanks were supposed to swim to shore and provide crucial cover for the infantry. But in those rough seas, they were launched way too far out. Dozens of them just floundered in the choppy water and sank straight to the bottom of the channel, tragically taking their crews down with them.
So because of that missing armor, the first waves of American infantry had to wade onto the sand with absolutely zero cover. They were walking blindly into perfectly sighted, overlapping arcs of machine gun fire. The grim reality of that kill zone was captured horrifyingly through the eyes of a German defender. Heinrich Severlaw, a machine gunner stationed above Omaha, later recalled firing relentlessly into the surf, just watching men desperately try to find any piece of cover behind the beach obstacles. Entire American companies were completely wiped out before they even reached the shoreline. The beach very quickly turned into a gruesome, blood-soaked stalemate.
Now, just down the coast from that slaughter, a highly specialized unit was attempting the absolute impossible to try and save the men pinned down on Omaha. Lieutenant Colonel James Rudder and his elite 2nd Ranger Battalion were tasked with scaling the 30-meter-high sheer cliffs at Point du Hoc. Their goal? Take out heavy artillery guns that were sighted perfectly onto the beaches. Under heavy fire, they scaled these sheer cliffs using ropes and ladders, only to reach the top and find a cratered, moon-like landscape. And the guns were completely missing. But they didn't stop there. They pushed inland, tracked down the hidden cannons in an orchard, and completely melted the firing mechanisms using thermite grenades. Just an incredibly dangerous step-by-step mission, flawlessly executed against all odds.
Section 5. Command paralysis, German incompetence.
Meanwhile, the German high command was basically paralyzed by a cascade of sheer, almost unbelievable incompetence and bad timing. Their meteorologists had confidently declared the weather way too terrible for any invasion, so fleet patrols were flat out canceled. Believing this, Field Marshal Rommel actually left France to go celebrate his wife's birthday back in Germany. A lot of commanding officers were completely drunk or sleeping off heavy hangovers when paratroopers literally started landing on their roofs. And the most shocking part of it all? Adolf Hitler, the only man who could authorize the release of the elite panzer tank divisions to crush the beaches, was asleep. And his officers were so terrified of his temper that they explicitly refused to wake him up, so the tanks just sat completely idle while the Allies gained their foothold.
Section 6. Cost of victory. The heavy toll.
156,000. Let that number sink in for a second. That is the staggering total number of American, British, and Canadian troops that successfully stormed the beaches and established a secure foothold in France by the end of that very first day. Through sheer grit, determination, and the ultimate sacrifice of junior officers who just stepped up and took charge when their commanders fell, they had finally cracked the Atlantic Wall. But of course, that victory came at an immense, truly visceral human cost. 10,000. That is the conservatively estimated minimum number of total Allied casualties, dead, wounded, and missing, suffered in just those first 24 hours. And honestly, the true number is likely much higher, since many bodies swept out to sea by the red tide at Omaha were just never recovered. It's a deeply chilling reminder of the very real human cost of this massive operation. Yet that immense sacrifice was undeniably the turning point of the 20th century. The beachhead was finally secure. From there, the Allies poured men and vehicles into the continent. Within just a few short months, Paris was liberated. Less than a year later, the Nazi war machine collapsed entirely, and the war in Europe was officially over. That success on the sand directly orchestrated the downfall of Adolf Hitler's entire empire.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought to really chew on. When you look back at Operation Overlord, the millions of tons of supplies, the brilliant deception campaigns, and then contrast all of that against the fact that the entire invasion was nearly saved because a few German meteorologists read a weather chart wrong and Hitler just wanted to sleep in? So, how much of the history is actually shaped by careful, meticulous planning, and how much of it is ultimately decided by pure, unpredictable luck? Thank you for exploring the minute-by-minute reality of D-Day with me.